Muchísimas gracias a todas y todos los que nos acompañan el día de hoy. Estamos dando inicio a un ciclo de conferencias titulado Mujeres y Políticas Públicas, en el que nos acercaremos al trabajo que hacen académicas, investigadoras, expertas, analistas, profesionales de las políticas públicas, personas que están en campo, que están en la administración pública de distintos órdenes de gobierno e incluso organismos internacionales. El día de hoy nos acompaña Rana Tofik. Ella es de Egipto y nos va a hablar sobre la reducción de la pobreza en países de bajos y de medios ingresos. La conferencia será en inglés, así que les pedimos una disculpa por si llega a ser este un inconveniente y haré la presentación de la maestra Rana Tofik. Rana Tofik is from Egypt. She currently serves as a monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning officer at Save the Children, a position she has held since January 2023. She holds a master's degree in public policy from King's College London, a bachelor's degree in politics with human rights from the University of Essex, and a diploma in monitoring and evaluation from the American University in Cairo. She is also a research scholar with the Leaders of Africa Institute. Rana, thank you for being with us. The word is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan, for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. Let me share my screen. Okay, so as Juan told you, my name is Rana Tawfi. I currently work in the humanitarian field, and my research today falls under one of my research obligations under the research scholarship that I'm working on with Leaders of Africa Institute. So I'm basically looking at poverty, and basically my overarching question is why countries continue to stay poor while other countries tend to graduate from poverty. So it's an ongoing research, and today I'm just sharing one aspect of it, but it's still ongoing. So the thing is with the poverty research, if anyone's taken it before, it's a lot, it's extensive. There are a lot of pillars to it. It's not quite direct, and it's very multi-layered. At the same time, there are different ideas of what poverty is. And so before we can understand how to combat poverty, we need to understand how we can define poverty. So at first, usually the definition of poverty has evolved over time. So it was about just regarding income or consumption, but now it has transcended into more about capability deprivation. So it's more interconnected to human rights. So it's the inability to live in a healthy, educated, to live healthy, educated, and dignified lives. So it also encompasses denial or access denial to food, shelter, healthcare, education, and freedom. And so it constitutes a violation of human rights. So now, usually before it was a unidimensional understanding of poverty, and now it's graduated to become more multidimensional. With that comes a change in how to measure poverty. So there are two out of several types of measurements for poverty. So on the one hand, when we're talking about income-based poverty, we tend to measure using the poverty line, the international poverty line. So it used to be $2.15 a day. That's if you live below that, that's when you're considered of extreme poverty. However, it has changed recently to become $3 a day, and also it has changed according to where you live. So if you're in a low-income country, it's $3 a day. If you're in the lower middle, it's $4.20 a day, and if you're in the upper middle, it's $8.30 a day. On the other hand, there is the multidimensional index. So this is usually this is held by the Oxford Institute as well as with UNDP, and it measures on three fronts. It measures health deprivation, so basically regarding child mortality and nutrition, education deficits regarding years of schooling and school attendance, and living standard gaps, including cooking, foil, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, and assets. The one thing to take into consideration is it's not necessarily the case that if you increase and if you're becoming you're more better off in terms of income poverty, that means you're better off in multidimensional poverty. There are cases where multidimensional poverty exceeds income poverty, like in countries such as Chad, Guinea, and Sudan. Okay, poverty has also been, it's not only a national, it's not on national or regional agendas, it's on the global agendas. It started off maybe even before that, the Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015, where the first target was to lift people out of extreme poverty. And then once the Millennium Development Goals ended, it was also a key priority for the Sustainable Development Goals. And in terms of regional priorities, it also is one of the African Continental Free Trade Areas targets to lift around 50 million Africans from extreme poverty. However, so today, how poverty looks like is this. So overall, there has been an overall decline, like an 18% decline in the number of people living below $3 per day. The mean share of population extreme poverty is around 14.4%, but with the standard deviation 21%, which shows that there is an extreme variation between the different countries, different populations. However, there's still a high proportion of countries that still have high poverty levels. When we look at the regions, you'll see that most of the regions have seen a decline, except, or the most extensively not so, is Sub-Saharan Africa, which has continued to increase over the past 10 years. While 4 out of the 7 regions, or around 57% of the regions, have seen a decline, most notably is the East Asian Pacific and the South Asian areas. Sub-Saharan Africa continues to increase. Also, who have seen a slight increase as well is North America, as well as the Middle East and Afghanistan and Pakistan regions. When we look at, so here we're looking at the poverty statistics in terms of how much people make per day. Here, in terms of income groups, which is more on the strategic level. So when the World Bank classifies each income group according to 4 categories. So there's the low income, there's the lower middle income, there is the upper middle income, and there is the high income. When it comes to Africa, there hasn't been really a significant change in the income group status. You see, most of them have continued to be quite the same, and mostly they're low income countries. Seychelles is the only country that has consistently stayed within the high income category from 2014 to 2024, and is probably the only one that is a high income country in Africa today. While there are countries that have made some progress, such as Guinea, Tanzania, Comoros, Zimbabwe, and Benin, where they've moved from one income group, Sudan and Namibia have declined. Why am I looking into this today? So while there has been a lot of research on poverty, there are a lot of goals, there have been a lot of strategies regarding poverty, we are not actually set to meet the 2030 goal of reducing or eliminating poverty by 2030 under the Sustainable Development Goals. Actually, there are projections that suggest that we'll continue to remain in, it's like 8.9% of the world will continue to remain in extreme poverty by 2030. At the same time, even though there had been some progress, because of certain recent conditions such as COVID-19, such as conflict, as in the conflict conflict in Ukraine, the conflict in Palestine, the Sudan conflict and the DRC conflicts, amongst others, there has been a regression in the poverty reduction or the improvement in poverty that has taken place. So now, actually, most of the poverty is concentrated in two areas, so Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And they encompass the biggest amount of people living under the poverty line. At the same time, besides the fact of all the recent conditions and tensions and situation, the climate change has recently become also a key issue regarding the poverty reduction. So now climate hazards it's been estimated that they expose 80% of the poor to unprecedented vulnerability, which amplifies deprivation and undermining resilience. So even if some countries have made some progress, it is estimated that with the current constant change in climate, they may suffer further setback in the coming future. So why does poverty persist? There are several reasons why poverty continues, and sometimes it is the same to some extent across the world, but they come in different degrees. So to start off, a key issue is the idea of governance failure. So the fact that the countries have poor governance structures that are marred with corruption and weak institutions. And this is one of the key drivers of failure in Africa, for example, in their poverty reduction strategies, is that there are no strong governance structures to kind of ensure that poverty reduction stays on track. There's also issues with the economic structures in terms of the resource curse and infrastructure gaps, especially when it comes to Sub-Saharan Africa, and I do focus on Sub-Saharan Africa more because of the persistence of poverty. But when it comes to the resource curse, it's the fact that because they have an abundance of resource, there is a mismanagement of resource, and so there tends to be either they use it to export, and yet only a few reap the benefits, or there are people who take advantage of that, and so they rely only on one aspect of or one resource and tend to neglect the rest, and so that also causes an issue when something happens to that resource and they can no longer depend on it anymore. And at the same time, most countries in Africa do not have the adequate infrastructures, or even in other developing regions, to kind of ensure the decline in poverty. At the same time, there's a population growth. So more than 3%, Africa grows by more than 3% every year, which also causes a lot of pressure on governments to meet the growing populations in demand. At the same time, the population in Africa is primarily young, so that means that institutions such as education and healthcare really need to be strengthened in order to be able to escape the poverty trap. With the population growth, there also comes inequality, and that is also kind of linked to the rural and urban gap that takes place, where most people usually, because of bad or poorly managed economic structures in rural areas, they move to more urban areas, which also causes a lot of stress on the urban functions. Another very key aspect, especially to do with the region, is the idea of fragility. So it's been found that extreme poverty is highly concentrated in fragile and conflict-affected economies, and so it creates this situation kind of creates a mutually reinforcing relationship with poverties, and at the same time it destroys infrastructure, leads to massive displacement, and reduces the state capacity to deliver pro-poor services. At the same time, the effects of it are very long-lasting. So even if conflict has ended, the aftermath of the conflict continue to stay with the poverty, with the population. And so it's not easy to get out of that cycle. Last but not least is the agriculture stagnation. So with the issue with the climate and the change in the climate, agriculture has been seeing some ups and downs. And if not properly managed, it usually results in low productivity and substance cycles. There are also definitely other different issues when it comes to why poverty persists, and this also has to do with the fact that there are no social institutions that create a caliber or a cadre of a workforce that could meet the demands of the ongoing market needs, and that is a cycle in itself. So even if job creation is created, you don't have an educational system that can train and that can prepare them for the job market, and so the cycle continues. So who is affected? Like I said, there's usually a difference, and there's always going to be a difference between the statistics that we find for the poverty, which is the number of people living under the poverty line, and when it comes to multidimensional poverty. But as it stands today, 1.1 billion people live in acute multidimensional poverty, which means that they are deprived of either education, health, or living standards, or one of the three, or all three, or two of the three, with mostly concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. It's not only the fact that there poverty in different countries. There sometimes could be differences not only differences on the regional level, but there's sometimes differences in the country level. So there could be one country that has different poverty levels depending on location. So for example, in Burkina Faso, their poverty ranges from 20% in some areas to 88% in another area. And as well, progress varies by region. So for example, China and India are great examples of how they were able to graduate from poverty across the years. So it was said that China has lifted around 800 million people from poverty, and that could explain why the change in East Africa over the years and the decline in East Africa's share of poverty over the years, while at the same time in South Asia, India was able to reduce extreme poverty from 45% to around 20%, as well as Bangladesh. But where we continue to see issues is in African nations such as Nigeria, South Africa, and South Sudan. Okay. When it comes to poverty reduction strategies, there are a couple of strategies that are kind of mainstream across the different countries. But I'd like to just take a step back to explain that in 1999, the World Bank and the IMF had led this initiative called the Poverty Reduction Strategy Papers Initiative, which is basically encouraging countries to start and develop their own poverty reduction strategies as a way for them to kind of get some debt relief. And this was actually targeting mostly the people who are considered highly in debt countries. And so they started this initiative. Regarding who is in this initiative and who continued with this initiative, statistics are kind of odd when it comes to that, because some have started in 2002, some have started later on, and there isn't a comprehensive overview of who has actually continued to adopt this poverty reduction strategy. But however, some countries in Africa have developed it, and this includes like Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Mali, Rwanda, Uganda, and Zambia, but also countries in Europe such as Bosnia, Macedonia, countries in Latin America such as Bolivia, Guyana, Haiti, and Honduras, and Nicaragua, Yemen, Laos, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. So it wasn't just concentrated on Africa. It's not clear whether these strategies have completely worked or not. Some studies have shown that when they've tried to compare countries that have adopted this strategy versus countries that haven't in sub-Saharan Africa, there has been a slight change, a slight increase in income and GDP per capita for the countries that have adopted it, but it's not strong enough evidence and requires further speculation. So back to the common strategy. So one of the main common strategies that have been adopted across the different countries is the social protection. So basically main programs that have been implemented have been the conditional cash transfers, the unconditional cash transfers, and these have been quite big as you know, in Mexico, for example, in Brazil, they have been quite big in most countries. In Africa, it's more common to have the unconditional cash transfers than the conditional cash transfers. However, both have had some success over the years. There's also the idea of the focusing on economic growth. So it's either we do so there's either two steps of economic growth. Either we do it's like top down, where we're reliant on labor intensive manufacturing, formal sector job creation, or from bottom down, which is more supporting like smallholder agriculture, micro enterprises, the rural non-farm economy, and the urban informal sector. When it comes to aid, when it comes to governance and aid, there are also two types. So there are types to reform institutions themselves, and then there's aid being used for specifically poverty reduction. And used basically, and especially when it comes to governance, is to strengthen institutions to prevent corruption. Last but not least, there's also the investment in human capital and infrastructure, specifically when it comes to education, healthcare, roads, and energy. And when it comes, for example, there has been a lot of programs that combines the human capital and social protection when it comes to school feeding programs, where it is that you're focusing on school feeding in schools, so you can motivate so you can reduce food insecurity as well as increase school attendance. Who has succeeded? So when it comes to Asia, India has done a great job, as mentioned. It has developed these programs, one called, I'm not sure how to say it, but the MGN MGNREGA Jobs Program, which is focusing on improving livelihoods. And it's giving people 100 days of wage employment in return that the adult household beneficiaries provide involuntary support involuntary manual labor. And there is the Grameen program, which is actually founded in Bangladesh, and also there's a model in it in India, which is the microfinance program. So with India, this has actually reduced poverty by 45% to 20%. And you can also see it in the multidimensional poverty. There is only around 4.2% now that are in severe multidimensional poverty. When it comes to Bangladesh, two main things happened. One of them is the Grameen project. And then the second is the investment in the garment sector, which has created a lot of jobs. At the same time, it has also reduced, now today, Bangladesh is doing really well on the multidimensional index, with also around 3.9% in only 3.9% that are considered severe multidimensional, in 3% of the population that is considered severely poor. Last but not least, is in Asia is Vietnam, which has started doing these reforms since 1987, the Doi Moi reforms. And the thing is about Vietnam and why it's an interesting case study is because it was part of the communism movement. And so to be able to get out of this communism movement, they started liberalizing their economy. And so it was able to grow, and they're focusing more on investment, and they focus more on private investment and foreign direct investment and private investment, sorry. And so it has had major positive repercussions on poverty, which has reduced from 70% in 1980s to around 6%, less than 6%. And it actually has near zero multidimensional poverty nowadays. When it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, Botswana has also shown great improvements when it comes to poverty reduction, and this has to do with the fact that it was able to manage its diamond wealth in a positive way, and as well as strong governance and with low corruption levels. And at the same time, poverty fell sharply with also a very low multidimensional poverty index score. Ethiopia as well has started conducting more rural investment and safety nets, and also has decreased its poverty levels by 45 to 23%. And Rwanda as well has used more integrated cash transfers and job creation, and so has led to a significant progress. On the other hand, there are countries that are still struggling despite having had poverty reduction strategies in place. So for example, Nigeria, and with Nigeria, what is interesting is that it has a high poverty and it also has been receiving a lot of aid. So it not only relies on internal investment for poverty reduction, it's one of the countries that receives a lot of aid in comparison to other countries that may have similar or higher even poverty levels. And so there are several anti-poverty programs that were developed, such as ones concentrating on rural infrastructure and ones concentrating on food insecurity. However, the main issue or several issues like troubling Nigeria is the fact that there's a high corruption and a high mismanagement of funds. And so there is a weak oversight there's weak legal oversight and political interference. And they also lack a citizen-centered design and so tend to ignore basic needs like food, healthcare, and education. There continues to be high youth unemployment, income inequality, and poor service delivery, and it's already reliant on oil. And so it takes us back to the resource curse. So it's only they do get a lot of wealth from oil, but it's quite concentrated, and it doesn't match with poverty reduction efforts. When it comes to the DRC, has also had a lot of poverty reduction strategies over the past couple of years that were focused on growth, job creation, and climate resilience. However, the main issue with the DRC that's preventing it from graduating from poverty is the conflict situation. So it has been going through prolonged conflict, which is coupled with weak institutions and corruption. As a result of the conflict, there has been infrastructure destruction and displacement, which hinders development. And there is also poor governance and elite capture, despite the fact that it has mineral wealth. And so while there was they were over 70%, the poverty rate was over 70% 2018, it has been a minor reduction, which is 64% until there's another case where it has been very Mali has also developed the same sort of poverty reduction strategy paper and has had different strategies in place. However, the main issue is that it's heavily reliant on foreign aid. So almost all of its budget is based on foreign aid. And the fact is that it has helped with the amount of foreign aid has actually helped trigger conflict and helped trigger the 2012 coup that took place in Mali, and has also enabled corruption and weakened government accountability. And the issue is with aid is when you continue to provide aid, the countries start becoming super reliant on it and tend to neglect developing their own institutions. And at the end of the day, the poverty reduction strategies need to be led by the government and led by the country itself, and not by foreign donors. As what we see today is that there has been a decrease in aid cuts. So the more you're heavily reliant on aid, the more you tend to not grow your own institutions. Before I move on to this, I just want to cite some limitations that I've had during this research. And as I said, this is an ongoing research, so this isn't the end. I'm still looking into it and I'm still conducting more research. But a very big issue that I found is that the data for poverty is quite varied, and they come at different time periods. So for example, the multidimensional index, you'll find for Nigeria that they have the latest rate is from 2022, 2023, but for the DRC it's 2019. And the issue with that is that it kind of prevents an accurate representation or an accurate analysis of a comparative analysis between countries, because especially when it comes at two vast different periods of time. For example, with Botswana, although most studies are showing that Botswana is doing great and it's actually is doing well and has reduced poverty, the statistics have been the latest statistics were 2015, 2016, and nowadays other studies are emerging and saying that, well, it was doing well, but it's no longer doing well because it's become overly reliant on diamonds, and the diamond market has been fluctuating over the past couple of years, and so. And this causes an issue in understanding actually how countries have progressed and whether they have progressed or not, especially because these figures help countries develop their own policies to tailor policies according to these results. Another issue is that there isn't sufficient, or as I said, I'm still in the beginning, but to date, there isn't sufficient assessments of how these poverty reduction strategies, to what extent that they've worked. What I can tell you that overall, and that is the main thing that I found between Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, is that South Asia, the reason why it's done really well for itself is that it has adopted this approach where it's focusing both on economic growth and on social empowerment. And while Sub-Saharan Africa, all of them have similar ambitions, I think what South Asia is doing, and that's why it has been successful, is that it's been targeting specific groups. So, for example, there is a program in India that is focusing on rural households and connecting rural areas to mainstream areas, so they can ensure job creation and women empowerment and so on. And so every program, or most of the programs that it has, it combines two elements to it. So more on the income generation side, as well as there's a gender empowerment side to it as well. And we find this in Vietnam, and we find this in Bangladesh and in India. But so it is more, there's more, it's very targeted, it seems well studied, it seems to know the gaps where they have gaps in and try to fill them. However, with Sub-Saharan Africa, it's quite generic, and I think that's why they do not continue for so long. It's because they are not specifically, it does not seem that they have been specifically studied for the context itself. And at the same time, it seems, especially with the issue with the poverty reduction strategy, is that it was done, and that's an argument on the table, it was done for a specific purpose. So it was done so they can achieve debt relief, which after this objective has been fulfilled, there is not really much of an incentive to continue doing so. So it requires more tailored studies. So another limitation is, that's the second limitation that I have. There isn't enough assessments on how effective these studies are. At the same time, it requires time. So if I'm looking at a strategy that was developed in 2015, I need to give it a bit of time to kind of assess it. But even that's the case, it's been 10 years and there aren't enough data on it. So how do we move forward? So there are several ways. Well, there are definitely multiple ways into moving forward in the poverty reduction stream. So one of them is the idea of focusing more on the idea that poverty is a violation of a person's fundamental rights. So instead of framing it as a checklist, as okay, so they have graduated from poverty, they earn $4 a day. It's more of the fact that they need that. It's a deprivation of their basic rights, and so it becomes a more holistic approach to combating poverty. A second thing is, well, even if we build systems and we create jobs and there's been infrastructure development, if the countries are still in conflict, it will not succeed, because the idea of conflicts, they tend to destroy everything that was built. And so it's important that when we're, especially in the fragile and conflict afflicted areas, we should consider that we need to not jump to the economic growth, but start with the idea of peace building, because they will require a different route in order to graduate from poverty. When it comes to and on the third level, you need to kind of strengthen the institutions themselves. And this is the success with Vietnam, for example. It has worked on strengthening its internal institutions. It has started off with that. And so, and was overly reliant on transparency. So these two come hand in hand together. Moving forward, considering that climate, and there was a very recent study on the fact that most countries have overlapping climate issues that will affect people and may reverse a lot of poverty progress. So we need to start taking it seriously. I mean, climate change has been at everyone is like at every is on every country's agenda, but right now it's not just linked to infrastructure damages or agriculture, it's also linked to livelihoods. So there needs to be concentrated efforts in linking climate smart agriculture strategies and adaptive livelihoods. Data needs to be improved. So while World Bank has a lot of poverty monitoring tools, the OPHI also has as well, but we need to develop regular monitoring tracking systems for poverty reduction strategies within countries such as Africa that are led by the government itself and not reliant on third-party agents. Or at least if they will, there'll be another source of data to derive information from. And last but not least, there needs to be an inclusion of citizens. People need to be at the center of these strategies, because while economic growth is great and really does have a way of getting countries out of poverty, it's not the full picture, because, for example, there are countries like Ethiopia which have managed to reduce its poverty levels, but yet it's still multidimensional poor, because it doesn't have, it still lacks access to things for it to ensure a healthy standard of living. And this is also the same for Rwanda. So we need to ensure that there are people involved in these decisions, and that they are at the center. There is a people-centered approach to decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana, for this, for sharing with us your research is amazing. I'm speechless. I'm speechless. I have a many questions. The first one is, uh, I can see that you have a global south approach, because sometimes when we read about poverty or inequality, we start to have some research on Sweden, Switzerland, Luxembourg. For example, I was reading, of course, they have poverty also. For example, in Luxembourg, a lot of people from East Europe, they are going to live in the forest. So
Mm.
they also have poverty programs. And but they have some other strategies. For example, they have the whole transport is for free in
Mm.
Luxembourg, the trains and the bus station. And so I was like reading this and I was like, okay, but this is a different context,
Yeah.
and I can see that you have that we called the global south approach. Can you tell us something about it?
Yeah, so I mean, the interesting thing is that's actually that's a very good insight about Luxembourg. The interesting thing is apparently that actually there's more poverty in middle income countries than in lower income countries, which is quite interesting. I think because I'm coming from Egypt, and so poverty is something that I see all the time, and so especially when it came to this research, every time I'm reading it, I'm like, what am I going to be adding? This is all, we all know this, you know, these are the same problems, they're the same solutions that have been proposed. But I think the question that's been always on my mind, it's like, why do some countries get out of it and why some countries don't? And they're the same. Like my neighboring country, like we have all the Emirates and Oman and all that, they've been high income all their lives, but they're next to countries like so Saudi Arabia and Yemen are like right next to each other, and yet Yemen is conflict afflicted. So it's the idea that it's I mean we are it's I just think that because um we live in this area, so we get to understand it more, and we understand that it's not really straightforward. So even if we read all these theories, and yes, when A plus B equals C, that will happen, and maybe that happens in Luxembourg, but it won't happen in countries like Egypt, you know, it requires other layers. So I think that's probably why. But I also think the issue is, to be honest, is that even the data is very West. We all know this. It's very concentrated on the West. So I think that's why there's the movement of more global South research and so on. But I mean, who leads World Bank data? It's not someone from the global South, you know. So there's always going to be this conundrum of, are we actually reflecting the global South approach or not? Or are we reflecting, or are we just summarizing or analyzing data that has been passed down to us from another region?
We have a problem with data in Mexico. For example, I've been making a research in some rural context, and for example, in some part of Mexico, I found that we have people without any administrative registration. You know, like I met people with 70 years until they have their birthday act. No, I don't know the name of this.
The birth
So
certificate.
and also this was in Guerrero. This is like more in the south of Mexico, but in the north of Mexico, in Chihuahua, I've been making some field research, and I found some localities inside the localities with any registration for the houses. So we have in Mexico the fiscal federalism with all the resources from federal to subnational to local governments, and we have in the law some statements that you must give more resources to these localities with with more poverty. But we don't have in Mexico some localities with registration. So you have it's like invisible, you know, like you cannot achieve to give money to people that you don't have in the you don't have the data, you know, for people and also for localities. So and also I think in all Latin America, in also in Africa, also in South Asia, you have also the same problem.
Yes, actually, that's a very good point, Juan, because I was also thinking about this a lot, was the fact that because we also have the same situation in rural areas in Egypt, and it's an intentional strategy. So it's especially you can see it with women that they're not allowed to have IDs, so they stay in their area, or even children who may have been born out of wedlock, and so they don't have IDs. So it is a different form of poverty that we see. But that is also problematic when it comes to data, because then how can we trust when there are probably whole populations that are truly undocumented, that they don't count. So we actually don't really know the actual figures. So I think that was something that I was thinking about. Like this is reflective on what you can find, but it's not mean that everyone is included. And the fact is, we will know another aspect of it is the informal economy. So there are people thriving in the informal economy, doing really, really well. And we know this, for example, in Egypt, where people are doing really well, but they don't put it, they're not they do not put their money in banks. So you actually don't know the actual true status of the economy of of these types of countries. So how do you measure this? How do you build policies bearing this in mind? It requires a whole different set of interventions, and taking these with just like a pinch of salt, and not actually realizing that these are the accurate figures.
Another question is, um, you are an specialist on evaluation. So, what can you tell us about evaluation on public policies, focusing in poverty, on equality, or these problems that you have been researching?
Okay, yeah, because this was one of the challenges that I had. So the thing is, it's like what I've been seeing with the evaluation of the policies is that they are not comprehensive. Like it's not one big, but they're evaluating like specific programs, not the whole interconnected strategy. So there is more data definitely regarding South Asia, and it's more direct data, that more comprehensive evaluation data that I found. But I do think that is the biggest gap that maybe Sub-Saharan Africa has, because there aren't enough evaluation studies done on their poverty reduction strategies. And that is something that I believe needs to be tackled, because I think enough time has passed for it to be evaluated, especially since a lot of them have had different rounds of the same strategy. And so with some, they mentioned that they have evaluated it and some haven't. So I do believe that this is a gap that I've seen when it comes to evaluation of these policies.
And we don't have any questions in YouTube or Facebook, but I would like to make you some other, if you please. Um, what is next? Because I'm reading your presentation, and I'm like, you have like a really strong view on the whole planet. And I'm thinking on your proposal, and it's like I think we can work on it. Like for example, for some improvements in. I'm thinking in Latin America, of course, but you are thinking in Africa, in South Asia, and the MENA region. So what is next? What can we make?
Yeah, I also think that I would love to, like, I think I was trying to incorporate a bit of Latin America, but because there's so much, it was very difficult to do so. I think that what's next is actually there's so much to do. I think it's very overwhelming because you need to, I think, for example, my approach to research is that I like to know everything before I can decide what the gaps are. But I do think that we need to tackle one thing at a time, because there's a lot of layers when it comes to poverty, and there are things that we know and there are things that we don't know. So I do think that what's next is just deciding what is important for now. So now with there's literally 2 weeks ago a new report came out regarding how most countries, apparently 99.1% of South Asian countries have climate hazards. So I believe that all this progress may be reversed in no time. So I think maybe this we need to start off with first. And I think agriculture is a very, very important factor in improving livelihoods as well as improving climate chances. So I think we can start with that aspect.
And my last question, what what about local governments? Do you have
Yeah.
some proposals, some thinkings on local governments about the municipalities, the subnational governments?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, definitely. I think that a common issue is that governments that tend to be centralized tend to just neglect a lot of aspects of these strategies. So I think when you trickle down and kind of delegate different areas and maybe hire some experts, so like maybe having the NPM style people running local governments rather than just anyone who's maybe not qualified, I think truly maybe that will be a great approach. It's to kind of have the power kind of spread out and not concentrated. I think that the problem with that is that a lot of strategies do not succeed is because there isn't communication between what's set up and who knows down. So I see that a lot where it's like, oh, okay, so the ministry approves of this big education and innovation plan, but the people who are actually working on the ground have no idea. So it does require a lot of capacity building as well, and requires a lot of education. I think at the same time, and there has to be some training in politics. At some level, because in some countries this is not really the case. People who are elected for government are not usually politically savvy or politically educated. So I think even starting from that angle could be a good way of empowering the idea of local governments as well, and strengthening this type of institution.
Thank you for your presentation, Rana. It was a pleasure to have you with us. Do you have something to share with us, closing this presentation?
No, I want to thank you again for having me. I'm learning a lot about poverty reduction, and I think there's so much that we need to continue learning. And while I believe that a lot has been said and done, I don't believe that the point of conducting this research is to find something new, but it's more of kind of understanding why it hasn't changed. And even if we all know the reasons, it's not always the same in every country, and there's still so much to learn. There's still so many countries that are under research and that are neglected, whole countries. So that may have progress and may have declined. So I think in this aspect, there's a long way to go, and hopefully I will continue on this journey.
I learned a lot with your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and it was it was amazing. So we would like to read you. Do you have some papers in English or published?
Not yet. I am working on it, and so because it's still a long work in progress, but once I'm done, I will share it with you.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Well, thank you, Rana, for being with us,
One
and it was a pleasure. I hope
thing.
you can make another presentation someday with us by some, or maybe having you here in Mexico
I
also.
hope that
Yes,
was
it
my
will.
dream.
Yeah,
Next
yeah,
time.
it will be great if you can come in some conference or some other day. Thank you so
Thank,
much.
thank you so much, Juan. Have a great day.